read about need-based segmentation. Just read it. How could you do need-based segmentation in your business? That's the number one. The second thing, if you're going to do competitive analysis from a value standpoint.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the international relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is Jose Mirabal. And here are 3 things you want to know about Jose before we start. He spent the first 15 years of his career in sales, a great place for pricing people to have started. He worked his way up to becoming a pricing consultant, and he is now managing director of the Pricing Institute. Oh, and he has a background in molecular genetics. I guess that means he's pretty darn smart. Welcome, Jose.
Hi, how are you? Thanks, Mark, for having me.
Oh, thanks. This is going to be fun. So I know you wanted to tell me this before we started, but I'm going to ask you now. How did you get into pricing?
Because of a talk. Back in 2015, we were doing sales consulting, and I was trying to hit the rounds with large associations, right? Trying to get clients. So I hit this organization called Vistage. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Sure.
And it was sort of interesting because they said, yes, we would like to have you on board to give a talk. No, we don't want you to talk about sales because that's low level for our CEOs. And that surprised me. But they told me can't be in sales. So I had some background information back on a prior job I had at Telmex in the US. So I said, okay, let me talk about pricing, about a little pricing issue I had with them. And it was interesting because back there, at the end of that meeting, it was all CEOs. I remember there were 12 of them. 3 of them called me back the next day. And here I'm thinking I'm going to sell them some sales consultancy services. They actually said, no, we have some pricing problems. And that was the first time all of a sudden, I got a pharmaceutical laboratory, actually the oldest one in the country, saying we have a medication that we've sold for 86 years. We don't know what to tell what our visitors or, the medical visitors, the drug visitors, the guys that actually go to see the doctors. We don't know what else to tell them to actually keep moving this. I mean, they've had an 86-year-old product that was actually losing track, was losing sales and losing margins, and they wanted to see how they could solve it from a pricing standpoint. That was the first challenge I came across. The other one was a large company that they make, it was an industrial company, and they had big problems because the largest company in Chile was professionalizing their pricing from the buying side. So they actually had started doing this bidding process. So this company, who's been a sole provider for 12 years, all of a sudden it's been challenged that they will probably lose position on prices. And that had already happened with a company in Canada. And when that happened in Canada, they shut down the company and fired 600 employees. So all of a sudden they're negotiating same problem here in Chile, and they hire me from that talk. And that's how my pricing career started.
All from one Vistage talk, which is pretty impressive.
Well, you can see, what I realized from that point on is that there was something going on with the pricing variable. I mean, there was something interesting that, and that's what has happened ever since. You talk about pricing and everybody really stares at you as, as they call it, a deer in headlights. It's like they're looking at you talking about pricing. But the truth of the matter is that during all these years consulting, I found something very interesting, which is nobody ever really took any classes regarding pricing. I mean, I went to good schools. I went to school in the US. I got my MBA there. all my clients, they have MBAs too. And it's sort of interesting because I'm in Latin America. It's kind of like I always tell them, you've taken more English classes than pricing classes. Yet you talk about pricing every day, but you only talk English when you go to Miami or Las Vegas shopping around. So it's sort of interesting that I saw that here. And I have to tell you that it's endemic. It really doesn't matter where you go. You're going to find the same problem over and over. I had clients in 42 industries and 26 countries over the past 6 years. It's been crazy. And the funny thing is that it really doesn't matter who you talk to. Pricing knowledge is about the same, which is pretty much none.
Jose, have you had a chance to, do you have any clients in the US? And do you see any difference in pricing knowledge in the US versus anywhere else?
The answer is yes. I do have clients in the US. I have to say that usually everybody says that their pricing is different. Everybody tells you that the pricing is specific. Jose, we are on, I don't know, the materials industry. We're in the consumer products industry. We're in the pharmaceuticals. We're in the army. We're on the weapons business. And it's sort of interesting because they all do pricing the same. So it really doesn't matter. I can tell you that I've talked to, I have currently software companies as clients. I had laboratories as clients. And even though they sell different stuff, they all price the same. They are heavy focus on costs. Usually you want to talk about pricing. Usually the CEO is not around, which is sort of interesting because I always tell the guys, I said, dude, who pays you? I always tell the CEO this, who pays you? Who's in charge of your check, of your paycheck? They always tell the owner. And I say, how does he figure that amount? Usually it's the variable bonus. Well, it has to do with the EBITDA, right? With profits. And I'm like, who's in charge of your profits? And it's always sort of like a soap opera when I ask these questions because everybody keeps, rolling the balls. In some businesses, pricing is done by the operations people. In some other organizations, is the sales managers. In the other organizations, you have, I don't know, the sales guy setting prices. The truth is that what I found out is that it really doesn't matter. You could be in Germany, you can be in the US, you can be in Mexico. They all price the same. And I find that so interesting because it seems like everybody's focused on, when they talk about pricing, everybody focuses on cost. And it seems like everybody forget about the value part. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest issue you have today.
So Jose, before I ask the next pricing question, this is a really important question. How much coffee do you drink? Because you talk fast and nonstop.
Yes. Dude, I'm from Latin America. What do you expect?
I don't know. Is that how everybody talks down there? I have no idea. So tell us about the Pricing Institute. What is it?
I decided to I created Pricing Institute because I saw that there was a big gap, huge, tremendous gap in the lack of education and lack of pricing knowledge, not only at the organizational level, but also at the CEO level, at the board level. And what I found was a tremendous opportunity. And after years of having a very productive pricing practice in Latin America, what I found out is that I did not want to keep growing like a consulting firm. And so back in 2018, I did a churn. My consulting firm, it was crazy. We grew from 1 to 15 people in less than 6 months, and that was going good. And then I fired everybody. And the reason is because I didn't want to go the consultancy. I think there's a true value in consultancy, but I believe there's a bigger need when it comes to education. And I'm not talking about the large companies, because usually consultants are mainly focused on trying to, dog and pony everybody, saying, well, my client's such airline, my client's such banks. I see the problem from a more wider background. I mean, today we're in the midst of a pandemic. The tourism sector it was heavily hit. Chances are that by the time they open the doors, most hotels and touristic operations will run into bad pricing practices. And because of that, they will probably be running heavy promotions, even though their sales volume will decrease because of the quarantine and their requirements. And probably that's going to put a lot of people in cash flow negative positions. And I think that's going to be a big problem. Lots of companies are closing down nowadays. Everybody's blaming the pandemics, but nobody's talking about the underlying issue, which is not so much the pandemics as the business model or business models that are heavily relying heavily on costs, for instance, where everything, it tends to be sort of like industry margins. I think it's time for a change, and I think there's a big opportunity today. And I'm saying this to all my fellow pricers. I think you've done a fantastic job, and I told you this before you started recording. I mean, I'm a fan of you and what you do, but I think there's a bigger need. I'm not talking about pricing on airlines. I'm talking about pricing the little guy. You know, I'm talking about the little guy that has a legal services firm, the guy that is, I don't know, selling cakes on the street, or the guy that has maybe a grocery chain with 5 stores. I mean, those guys have no access to pricing. Obviously, they have no access to pricing, even less if it's a consultant. So I think there was a thing with education. So I decided to go into that route, use my experience, and start building courses and programs that actually companies could take, but focus mostly not so much on the theory and the concepts behind pricing, but going directly into learning tactics, implementing tactics, and actually have the team learn the tactics, learn the concepts. So these concepts, beyond the grasp of the consultant, they actually get transferred to the company. So that way, as I tell my clients, you know, I don't want to talk about your promotions again. I want to fix this stuff and move on to the next issue, because probably we're going to be talking about pricing issues for 5-7 years. And that's usually what happens.
Give us an example of a tactic that you're teaching these guys.
Well, let's see. There's way too many. I mean, just the course that I'm launching right now has 34. Let me just tell you, for instance, one of the things that I see nowadays is that there's a big problem monetizing value. But when it comes about monetizing value, the issue, it's not so much the calculation. It's just the qualitative analysis to actually come across, to figure out what's value, what is people valuing out on the streets, and how does that change, or how should my product configuration change? And I think I start there before I even get to the price. Warren Buffett said it, right? He's like, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Everybody's focused always on the pricing part, but the value part is completely neglected. So some of the recommendations that I'm figuring out is how companies can actually increase value. So for instance, financing. There's a lot of companies that nowadays still they only offer one price, one option, few options. They don't offer financing, for instance. You know, so you could use internal financing. It's incredible because it's sort of dumb, but let me just give an example. There's a huge seafood producer here in Chile. He exports. He also deals with the local market. He sells to restaurants and hotel chains and smaller distributors. He never accepted payments with credit card because his whole business was focused on B2B. So in B2B, everybody pays you in 30 days, which is a lie. Everybody pays you much later than that usually, but companies don't know that. That's a tip for everybody, okay? So what happens is that they did not offer credit cards. We just included the credit card issue on his sales, and we started, he actually, we did some segmentation work for him back in October 2019. In March 2020, we started the quarantine. His business imploded. I mean, he literally went to zero. But because of the segmentation work that we've done back in September, October, we opened up a retail line, which my client did not like because he thought it was a headache dealing with the retail clients. Well, this is what happens. Today, he's selling about 3 times the dollar amount he was selling before we started the pandemics, and 70% of that is coming from retail. Plus, he actually opened up the B2B operation, and he started offering financing options because what he found, and so that's just one idea. That
I love that. But here's, I want to point something out to the listeners for just a second, because what you just described to us, you said, it's not about pricing, it's about value. And then you started talking about value. And in the end, what you really said was, well, let's go build a different product. Let's go offer a different feature. Let's go build a product for new market segments. And what I love about that is because even though we think of ourselves as pricing people, we also think of ourselves as, how do you understand what value really means? And nobody in the company understands that. And once you start to understand value, you find that, oh, wait. You mean I can create products that have more value? You mean I can communicate value better to my marketplace? And I can capture that value in my pricing and in my sales. And so I thought that was a fascinating story because it had nothing to do with pricing. It had everything to do with value and essentially rebuilding a business once we understand value.
And when you actually read books, when you actually read all the materials, it's sort of funny because I find in all business textbooks that they talk about, everybody tells you that you need to give value, but nobody ever taught you how to price it. So it's sort of interesting because the whole concept of value is sort of like missing everywhere. Any textbook, any college book will tell you need to give value, you need to provide value. How much do I put a price on it? What price do I do? So what I found out is that really, when it comes to that part, there are two things pretty much that I see that are missing. This is based on my experience. The first thing that is missing is that there is no model, or at least there is no set model or known model. I built my own, but there's no model that a company could use to actually find value. Even though today, obviously, you can do segmentation, you can do need-based segmentation, which is what I think is just the top way of doing a segmentation today. Then you cross it with transactional analysis and you get a killing business. But the thing is that when it comes to monetizing value, everybody will tell you, this is valuable, this is not so much, but there's no process. There's no set process. And I think that's a big gap in there. So people know about value, talk about value every day. They just don't know how to process it, learn it, identify it, monetize it. Then I'm sorry.
I was going to say, although I agree with everything you just said, I actually think the problem is a little bit different than what you described, right? I agree that all of those things are problems, but I think the more I talk to people, the more I realize the real problem is people don't even know what value means, right? We use the word value a lot, but you couldn't, you ask any company, what's the value of your product? And there's no way that they know how to describe the answer to that question.
Like coaching.
Yes.
It's the same as coaching, right? It's like it means nothing and everything at the same time. Yes, absolutely right. And as I said, it's like nobody taught you in school or college, and there's no corporate program nowadays that teaches from the board all the way down to the salesperson. And I'm not saying that they are all the way down. I'm just saying, just a specific segment. But nobody teaches you how to capture value. What is value? For instance, I segment value in 10 dimensions. Okay. When I think of value, I think of the value triad. I think of to me, for instance, a hot cup of coffee could be valuable. Maybe a specific brand of coffee could be another type of value. So what I decided to do is that break down value in 10 dimensions, brand, quality, service, physical attributes, ease of access, use by occasion, experience, style. So these are things that actually make up value. So if you don't have a qualitative model to actually sort of like sit down with your people and figure out what customers really like, this is what happens. Everybody's just turning this whole configuration or product configuration game into something based out of cost. When in reality, people should be building products and services just to satisfy on-field needs. And I think that's where competitive advantage is. That's what you have. Most people focus nowadays in technology, and they don't realize that the biggest change in my mind, and correct me please if I'm wrong, but to me, the biggest change or the biggest thing that you've seen is twice. Number one, everybody's always trying to interview how come that company became wealthy, rich, and famous? Everybody's talking because I don't know, the CEO wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning, does yoga and does exercise. Nobody realizes that all leaders nowadays, they share one thing in common. They're all pricing leaders. Think about it. You think about Amazon Web Services, Uber, Netflix, Airbnb. All these are companies that they have a strong grasp of pricing. They use it, they understand it, they work on it every day. Then you have other companies like Walmart, and everybody thinks that Walmart is a pricing leader, which in my mind, it's sort of. I mean, they're the leaders of low prices, but nobody realizes that, for instance, Walmart back in 2009, selling $400 billion, their EBITDA was 2.69. 2020, they're selling $513 billion. They're selling over 20% more, and they have exactly the same EBITDA. If I were the Walmart, the Walsons, I would have fired long ago those CEOs. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm making the same amount of money and you're selling 20% more. I mean, all we got was the cow fatter. We didn't have it. I mean, there's nothing there that actually the company can grasp. Then you add a drop in demand, a pandemic, a social upheaval. And then what happens is that demand drops, and then you have Walmart shutting down 100 stores just because they have to make up that 2.69 EBITDA. So those are crappy businesses in my mind. And I think that unfortunately, because of nobody really challenges pricing, because think about it. Everybody challenge me when it comes to value-based pricing, but they don't challenge cost plus. And the funny thing is that because most companies, most professionals, specifically most investors, if not all of them, most CEOs do not challenge their pricing, what happens is that they end up perpetuating all bad pricing habits. And which are these bad pricing habits? You know them, I know them. I think the audience knows them too. Everybody's pricing via cost plus, okay? Everybody's looking at sales and market share as success measures, when in reality they shouldn't be, because you can sell something and lose money, so it should be profit and growth. And then what happens is that even compensation. I mean, it's funny because I'm sometimes arguing with some CEOs, and I tell them, dude, you're paying your salespeople based on sales. Even though you don't care about sales, all you care is profit. So why don't you compensate your salespeople and align their compensation to your business model? So they look at you again, they stare you as a deer in headlights, and they're like, oh yeah, thank you very much for the advice. But the truth is that because of these things, and these are, I'll go back to it, lack of knowledge, lack of pricing knowledge. What you have is that you have a bunch of CEOs running $100 billion companies, but they're really running them exactly the same way as a mom and pop that is just putting cost plus. And again, everybody tells me cost plus works. And I'm thinking, well, then explain bankruptcy then. I mean, if cost plus works, then how come we have bankruptcy? You know, everybody usually puts a price over their costs. So how come you explain that? Or the other thing is that if cost plus really were to work, then why are you having so much problems or so many problems trying to convince your customers of your value, but you have a pricing problem?
I think that's an interesting observation. So first off, I'm not as angry or negative towards cost plus. I mean, I hate it. It's not the right answer for anybody, but it's easy. Companies find that it's really easy. And so if you're a startup and you don't want to figure out value, okay, I get it. You could use cost plus. You're leaving money on the table if you do that. But I think the thing that you pointed out, which I really liked, was companies who are doing cost plus don't have to understand value, which means they don't understand value, which means they don't know how to sell value.
Right.
Now they're throwing a bunch of products out saying, hey, here's our price. Do you want to buy our product? And nobody cares about your product.
Not only they don't know, but I'll tell you what they don't know. They don't know how to recognize value. They don't know how to monetize it. They don't know how to sell it. They don't know how to promote it, and they don't know how to monitor it. So the truth is that when it comes to your value component on your business, which is pretty much the only reason why you should exist, which is to provide value, you don't know how to quantify it or monetize it. And as I read from Rafi Mohammed on wonderful book he has, he actually said, I still have to, and it's true, I still have to hear somebody going to the store to buy a TV, a flat screen, and when the sales guy tells the person, what's your budget? The guy answers 2.2 times cost, please. Nobody buys like that, but everybody prices like that, and it makes no sense. I think that's a big gap. That's why when we're talking about innovation, and I do lots of talks on innovation and pricing in innovation, I always say it. It's like, it's sort of interesting that the value thing, it's something that everybody talks about, but nobody really realizes that the only way your value or the value you offer will actually work, it's by how well you capture that value back from your pricing strategy. That's why if I want to improve the pricing of one of my customers, the first thing I need to do is that relationship of value between my customers' products and the client's needs in the market, and how those two things talk when I contextualize them and put them against other competitors. So what happens is that you find out, for instance, that everybody says, well, you know, our competitors are dropping down the prices. And I'm thinking, yeah, dude, but you're the only one offering financing. So does that play? Should it play? I mean, oh, but you know, we are getting killed. There was a German company here, huge company, the largest in the world. And they're here, right? And the CEO is telling me, dude, you know, it's like we're fighting against the Indians. The Indians are here. They're dropping the prices. Now the Chinese, I'm telling you, dude, you're German. You're doing all these other services. Do they do their services? No, they don't. Oh, do you do them? Yes, of course we do. How much you charge? No, we do them for free. So when you hear these sort of things, it's like you realize, yes, I think the lack of knowledge, and not to the CEO only, to the whole team, is making them stare at a tree, but miss the whole forest. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing. So when I think of pricing, I look at first value configuration. Because I said, Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay, but value is what you get. So let's focus first on what the client is getting, or how can we improve the number of options and expand the width and the range of options that we can offer clients, just like a restaurant. So I want my clients to come in and really, regardless what they want, always have the right option for them. And I think when you have that, that's the same thing as having the right price for everybody.
Yep. Jose, we are going to have to wrap this up. This has been fast moving. I'll say that. but last question, you knew to expect this one. What's one piece of pricing advice you'd give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business? Study, learn, read, take courses, get acquainted. I've been doing pricing for the past 6 years, full time. And I tell you that I have, it's overwhelming the amount of reading materials that I have or I can get. I think that you need to read. I think education is the biggest problem, okay? If I were to give you some basic pieces of advice, read about need-based segmentation. Just read it. How could you do need-based segmentation in your business? That's the number one. The second thing, if you're gonna do competitive analysis, do competitive analysis from a value standpoint. So, for instance, you know, I use 10 dimensions, and Rafi Mohammed introduced, I think, 6 or 7, right? Like brand, quality, service. If you start doing competitive analysis based on those dimensions, you can break down the offer easier. And if you know, for instance, that maybe a need from a client is that they need an ease of purchase, maybe they need credit, maybe they need credit options, and so on, then you can actually go look at your competitors and see what are they offering in terms of financing, ease of purchase. And that way you can find out what I call market imperfections. What are market imperfections? When you actually find that there's a need in the market and it's unmet, because even though the need is there,
there's nobody filling it. Think about Netflix, right? They fill a need, okay? They just use the typical Chinese restaurant business model of a buffet, okay, to actually offer a flat subscription fee for everybody. And they just killed Blockbuster, even though they try to sell the business to Blockbuster and they said no, right? Thank God. So my point is that it's do segmentation, read about need-based segmentation, just specifically about that. I would actually also recommend you, I recommend you read about, for instance, I like Rafi Mohammed. I think I take the same approach. I think there's a lack of also, when it comes to pricing, there's no like a reference point of all the pricing strategies and tactics that you can have. It's like everybody does cost plus because, as you said, it's easy, but there's really nothing else beyond. So my question is, when do you put discounts? When do you start working about versioning? Should you use functional versioning, classical versioning, used version, some sort of functional or by use or by needs? When should you consider ease of purchase or purchase options? So because there's no structure, it really doesn't matter who you are. You probably don't even know where to start. So I would say read about value-based pricing. I recommend 1%, the 1% Windfall by Rafi Mohammed. He actually went to Cornell too. I didn't know that, but excellent book because it's the only book I found so far. And you probably know another. I would ask you to do the same, but it's the only book that I see or that I read that actually shows about 70 pricing tactics in order and how you could use them. And I think that very simple point, if I give it to an entrepreneur or a CEO or a company, if they know a frame of options that they can consider, plus they have another little frame where they know what the value, what's the value clients are looking for, then you can figure out, hey, these guys are looking for credit. These guys are looking for security in their purchases. For instance, now post-pandemics, everybody's doing the same. Everybody's looking for security.
Okay. Jose, I'm going to have to stop you because I think you could talk for an hour straight.
Absolutely.
But I do want to thank you very much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Go to pricing.institute.
That's pretty easy. Excellent. And we'll have a link to your LinkedIn page on our show notes. That'll be great. So
absolutely. Thank you very much.
Right. You're very welcome. Episode 125 is all done. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts if possible? And if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.